This is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. This month we're talking about the importance and the challenges of keeping the Native American cultures alive here in the United States, and particularly right here in the Black Hills. Three guests with us to talk about that. Whitney Rencountre, he is with Rural American Initiatives, is the Atiapi Yes Program Director. Jessie Rencountre is an author, Rapid City Area Schools counselor, and the 2017 Emerging Tribal Writer Award winner. Darrell Redcloud, he is a professor at Oglala Lakota College and also an instructor for the Atiapi Lakota language program here in Rapid City. Native Americans now comprise less than 2% of the population here in the United States, and that can make keeping those cultures alive a challenge. More than 500 tribes in North America these days, many of those languages unfortunately falling by the wayside. Traditionally, stories handed down from generation to generation. Whitney, we're going to start with you. What makes keeping those cultures alive so important?
Well, I think it's the fabric of our nation. It's the fabric of who we are. You know, when we talk about the youth that we serve here in Rapid City and all across the nation, there's an epidemic of dropout rates, plummeting, and relationships in the cities, relationships all across our country. And I believe our youth are in such a need, not only Native American youth, but all youth are in such a need of learning the facts, the history, the beautiful culture that was here historically when settlers first came to America, that is still alive. And I think when we learn about each other and other cultures, it opens up more opportunities. And when we see the flourishing relationships in our city because of the Atiapi Youth Mentoring Program and the other efforts in our community, we see positive relationships forming. And I think that's really going to improve relationships not only in our community, but communities across this nation. And it's all because of learning the history of our peoples.
Yeah, you talk about people learning the correct facts. How much do those facts get twisted from what people actually know now?
Well, historically in America, our educational system was written from one perspective, and the Native voice was not included in the history books. And so most Americans get zero history and knowledge of the Native cultures and languages. So they rely on people like John Wayne, the Hollywood movies. They rely on things they see in social media rather than learning from an educational perspective. And so what that does is it creates guessing, it creates prejudice, ideas that aren't really fact. And so when we have the opportunity to learn from one another and teach the facts, we start to understand and learn just how beautiful and strong the Native culture really is. And I think when that happens, it helps all people, but it especially helps our students that are struggling to get through school. And so it's so important to learn and to share and to grow and have opportunities where students can learn the different perspectives in the classroom. And I believe that's so important for our students.
Now, Jessie, as you look at it, why is it so key to keep that culture alive, especially for the young people today?
Yeah, so how I try to do this with young people that I work with is being able to try to share some of our stories. Stories have played a huge part in our culture over the years. Not only did they teach lessons to our younger children and young people, but they also kind of kept some of the history alive as well too. As we kind of changed our roles in society and such, things have changed. For our family dynamics and such, and we don't really necessarily have as much storytelling that's happening anymore. Some of my best memories as a young girl was hearing stories told to me by my mother or other elders. And some of these stories still stick with me today, and they're lessons that I've learned, values that I still carry with me today that were learned through these stories. So because that connected to my spirit, I thought, you know what, I want to continue to do this, not only with my children, but children that I work with, because I feel like there's so much more connection that happens when I share a story with a lesson in it, when I do my work with children.
Now, traditionally, those stories were handed down orally.
Yes.
So how important is it to keep that going? Because it doesn't take long for those oral histories to disappear.
Right. It is important. I think that, any chance that we can get as aunties, as moms, as grandmothers, or the male figures as well too, to try our best to share those stories that were shared with us when we were children. Like you said, things have changed over the years, and so my way to do this is wanting to incorporate this into written stories, because Our children spend so much time in the education world and in the classrooms, and they're required to read. So why not take some of these stories and turn them into books or lessons that kids can read? So you're getting not only the lesson in a story, but also you're getting that educational piece as well too.
How about going high tech these days? Are you recording these? Are you recording the stories from the elders, that those can be preserved that way?
That is actually one of my biggest ideas that I have. Just recently, within the last few months, I realized after hearing back home on my reservation of Standing Rock, how many of our wonderful wise elders are passing away. And that kind of sends a sense of panic into me, knowing that every time an elder passes, that they take some awesome stories with them that they have learned. And so I have this idea of wanting to go home, not only to my own reservation, to different reservations, and record some of these stories, and not only preserve them through audio versions or video versions, but also maybe even try to share them, and turn them into children's stories as books.
Right. Darrell, as you look at it, why is it important to keep that culture going strong these days?
It's part of our identity as a Native person. The stories, the language, the culture, the values of Indigenous people are the identities of the Indigenous people. So to try to preserve them as best we can through language, through story, and through culture is very, very important for our people. So we come together to try to do our best to try to preserve those through our teaching abilities and so forth as educators.
Now, your specialty is language. We, as I mentioned a little bit ago, some of those languages fallen by the wayside. How is the health of the Lakota language these days?
Right now on the reservations, I would say maybe 25 to 30% people on the reservations are actually speaking the language, but it's getting stronger because of the immersion schools that are happening on our reservations and other entities that are helping to develop curriculum for the educational systems on the reservation as well as off the reservations, such as the colleges and different ones throughout the Black Hills. Different colleges are implementing Lakota language and culture.
How much are you starting? How much are you trying to start with the youngsters, with the kids, getting them learning?
The younger the better. The younger the better, because the young ones, they pick up everything. They learn really quick. So if you share the language with them and implement some of the values along with the language and so forth, they start to learn really quick. I mean, they'll repeat it just as you say it, they'll repeat it just right there. So they're really, really good to teach at a younger age.
How tough of a language is it to learn?
It's very easy. It's very easy, and all you got to do is apply yourself, and it's simple, especially knowing English and then translating it back and forth from English to Lakota, Lakota to English, knowing what it means. It's easy to start to understand the language.
Now, you said, though, Lakota is unique. If you speak Lakota, that does not help you learning Navajo. That does not help you learning Cherokee.
Each individual tribe has their own language and our own cultural beliefs and value systems and so forth. So, of course, our allies, they learned different parts of our language, like the Cheyenne. They learned part of our language. We learned some of the Cheyenne language, but those other further out tribes are completely different from the way we are.
Now, Whitney, we were talking about how the languages differ. Is there a common Native American culture? Is there a particular Lakota culture? How do those tie together, or is there a tie together with those?
Well, I think every tribe is unique. Every tribe has their set of beliefs, culture, especially their creation stories. And I think the creation stories have a lot to do with their place throughout this nation. For instance, we believe that our creation starts here in the Black Hills. This is the birthplace of the Lakota people, and the creation story is connected to Wind Cave, one of the National Park Service monuments here. And then we followed the buffalo historically. At one time, there was 30 to 60 million buffalo. And so we had such a connection, and a lot of the things that we do and the way we live is in connection to how the buffalo lived when they faced the storm during the blizzard rather than hiding, how they take care and protect one another. And so when you go across this nation, every tribe has their own dwelling, their own way of life, creation, the languages. But I think from times throughout history, we've traded items with each other. We've traded songs and dances. We've traded, like with the three affiliated tribes, we have connections through the trading of the corn and the buffalo meat. And so the Omaha tribe, we traded the pesha, which is the traditional regalia that you see on a men's traditional dancer, for instance. And so a lot of these things are connected, but I think overall as indigenous peoples, we believe that we have this connection to Grandmother Earth. And so when we live a certain way, we always took care of the orphans, of our elders and the children. We always kind of protected them in that way. So there's many differences, but many connections as well.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll continue our look at keeping Native cultures alive here in the U.S. when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. And good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the challenges and the importance of keeping Native American cultures alive. Jessie Rencountre is an author, school counselor, and a 2017 Emerging Tribal Writer Award winner. Congratulations on that. You mentioned your kind of expertise, the way you connected with the kids is through storytelling.
Yes.
How much do the kids today absorb in those old traditional stories that you're telling them?
You know, they still do. You know, a lot of people might think that kids are really connected to like high-tech stuff like video games and the internet. And of course they are. We live in 2019. But I always like to think of us being spirits first. You know, no matter how high-tech we become, you know, in the future, we're always going to be spirits first. And I always think when I'm sharing these stories with a group of students or even just one student, I always think that, hey, my spirit has to connect with their spirit. And that's how they learn, because they know that when I'm sharing these stories that I have intentions for them to have some good teachings and good lessons and values come out of these stories. And so I think that in 2019, with all these high-tech stuff we have, I think that sometimes our kids crave that connection, you know, without the technology.
How do you balance that old and the new? Do you use that new technology to teach the kids the old traditional ways?
Sometimes I do. So, you know, I will, if I'm in my own counseling office and I have a group of students or one student in there, I will just share with them one-on-one. We just have that connection. But if I'm with a bigger classroom and in the past years, what I've used is maybe sometimes some pictures up on the whiteboard, you know, to kind of have that with them. But I kind of really like sticking to using their imagination, because our imaginations are powerful. And so when a kiddo can use their imagination to kind of imagine these characters and these lessons that they're being taught, boy, wonderful things happen. So.
All right. Darrell Red Cloud is an Oglala Lakota College professor and instructor for the Ateapi Lakota language program. How do you convince, you're competing against those same things, kids playing Fortnite. How do you get them to concentrate their energy into learning the Lakota language?
I try to make it interesting by implementing objects such as animals, small animals that we could buy at the store and stuff like this, or other teaching materials, flashcards and stuff like this, and getting them to repeat it repetitively. That way they find it to be fun by doing different types of activities in the classrooms and so forth, so it draws their interest. And a lot of the time they walk out of the classroom saying a few Lakota words, and I hear it in the hallways, and it's very encouraging to know that they're doing the best to try to preserve it the way they know how.
How much does knowing that language make them feel a part of the culture?
First of all, I explain to them that it's their identity as a Lakota person. It is their language, and they should be proud of it. So from there, they feel positive about themselves, and then by sharing the language through curriculum and so forth that has been developed, it's easier for them to read and to spell and all of that type of stuff. So they implement it just like the English language, and they feel good about it.
Whitney Rencountre is with Rural American Initiatives, is the Ateapi Yes Program Director. When you were talking earlier, you were talking about keeping kids in school, keeping them away from drugs, keeping them away from alcohol. You've got the gang problems. How do these traditional ways help you combat those problems, or do they help you combat those problems?
Absolutely. I think historically our ancestors never used drugs and alcohol. So when you connect and bring back the traditional ways, drugs and alcohol really do not match, and they do not fit within the culture. So we encourage our students to stay away from addictions and drugs and alcohol. We encourage that because traditionally it wasn't who we are, and it wasn't what we're meant to be. So when we instill the traditional ways and the identities, a lot of times it just simply comes down to having an indigenous person in the classroom, a Lakota, Dakota, Nakota person in the school, to support them, to share time with them, to make them feel welcome. And I think a lot of times that's the first step. So the more, like if we have a population, and in the district we have 20% Native students in our district. And so to have 20% staff would be ideal, and you know, that are Native. But I think ultimately, when you can become a trusted adult in a student's life, it doesn't matter your background. You start to break down the barriers, and I think our students crave that. They crave our traditional ways, they crave the way we live, and when someone can spend time sharing their traditional ways, they really buy into that. And it makes them feel welcome, comfortable, and they can focus on their school, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to be part of this, whatever you have, like the program that we have at Teapi, because it reinstills who they are. And then they can share that with their classmates. And I think that ultimately, when we can subject our students to Native culture, regardless if they want to believe in it or not, and that's not the goal, is to try to convert people to believe our way. It's just you have a better appreciation for that. And I think that creates a healthy environment in our schools.
Now, do you see when you guys sit down and look at the outcomes of all of these kids, do you see an absolute difference that you can see of the kids that you have brought in to the culture? Yes. And those that have not?
Yes. So when we talk about the last 5-6 years, students that have participated in the Ateapi program, 90 to 95% of them have graduated high school. So we see a huge impact of incorporating our culture, incorporating trusted adults, developing relationships, and we really don't even measure the rest of the outcomes. But ultimately, we have staff that have come back to work for us. We have students and staff that have went on to become teachers in the district now. And it's creating a culture that goes above and beyond. I think ultimately it's really connecting us as peoples. I think that creating that in our community is so important.
Jessie, going to go back to the storytelling for just a minute. When you're telling these traditional stories to the kids, what kind of stories are you telling them?
So usually, like I said, they're usually about like some type of value, right? And so it depends. Sometimes I've made up stories on the spot, you know, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I have a story for that. So sometimes I'll take the situation that the kid was in and I'll make it into a story. Sometimes making up characters on the spot right there that will kind of match the situation that they're in. Usually that it will teach something like kindness or compassion, forgiveness, you know, having a sense of hope. And so being able to match what that child or children are going through at that time, helping them relate to it. So. And
how much does that really instill that in him, to get that in a story at that young of an age? You know, when we're young like that, if we have that connection to a child, you know, relationships are all about being able to connect to someone, you know, no matter what age we are. But when we have that connection with someone and they're sharing something with us, we really hold it and take it in. You know, for me as a young child, my mother sharing these stories with me, you know, I thought, wow, you know, whatever she's sharing with me is big, and I'm going to hold this in, and I've carried it with me, you know, now as a mother, as a school counselor. So I think that being able to have those relationships with those kiddos and sharing some good things with them, values and lessons that they've learned. I've had high school students now that I once had as elementary students tell me, hey, Mrs. Rencountre, do you remember that story you told me? You know, and they remember it. So. All right, we got to take another break. We'll finish up our look at keeping Lakota and Native American cultures alive when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. And good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the importance and the challenges of keeping Native American cultures alive today in 2019. Darrell Redcloud is an Oglala Lakota College professor and an instructor for the Ateapi language program. As you look at it, are there parts of the Native cultures that non-Natives may have misconceptions about, maybe don't understand, should know, but they don't know?
Yes, in the beginning, when they first came across the country and they came across our people, we were speaking a completely different tongue. It was foreign to them, so they misunderstood a lot of it. It was a mystery to them, so to speak. And they couldn't understand it, so it kind of made them afraid of who we were as a people. But as they started to mingle with our people more, trade with our people more, they started to learn our language and so forth, so they got comfortable with us and so forth. And everything isn't as bad as the John Wayne movies and things like that, you know. There was a lot of good things that were done between both sides, sharing culture, sharing language and so forth. So our language is very, very vital to our people. It's our identity. So it's very important that we try to do whatever we can to preserve that language, because like Whitney said, without the language there is no culture, there is no stories, there is nothing else. From the language comes all of the Lakota culture, stories, and so forth.
Whitney Rencountre is the YES Program Director, the Atayapi YES Program Director for Rural American Initiatives. As you look at it, are there things that you wish people knew or understood that they don't?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I think if people throughout our nation had a better understanding of our cultures, you know, I think we would break down a lot of barriers. I think for me, the biggest challenge is when we develop friendships, we tend to appreciate each other's differences, the differences that are between us. And I think a lot of times throughout our nation, one of the things that divides us the most is our power struggles. And a lot of times it's, I'm right, you're wrong, so on and so forth. It's the ego gets involved and it divides a lot of people. But I think when we get into the nuances of that, ultimately, Creator made all of us and gave us our own special way of thinking, our own special way of behaving as such. And when we learn the good things of other cultures and leave the bad, is what our elders and our leaders long ago instructed our generation to do. And so when we take education, we can use it for good. We learn about the culture. There's a lot of positive things in our culture, and all cultures use the good, do away with the bad, and then we open up a lot of opportunities.
And Jessie Rencountre is an author and a school counselor. As you look at it, what do you wish people knew or understood about Lakota culture in particular?
You know, it's a culture that is thousands of years old, and many teachings that have been passed down from generation to generation. You know, and I just kind of want to piggyback off what Darrell and Whitney said, is that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to learn about our culture, you know, whether it's through the language or through storytelling or whatever it may be. But the more you learn, the more you can expand your mind, no matter what race you are. You know, if you're open-minded like that, boy, your life will be a lot more rewarding. And so being able to open up your mind to learn some of our culture would be awesome, because like we've had a history of having that wall between our cultures. And so I think that this up-and-coming generation is going to be the generation that makes that happen.
Now, Darrell, you mentioned that it all starts with the language. Do you feel good about the future of the Lakota language for the next 100 years, the next 200 years from now?
I sure do, and as long as I'm around, I'm going to be teaching it. And I would like other younger generations to pick up the language and carry it forward for the Native people, the Lakota people, the indigenous people, whatever language, indigenous language that is. It's very vital, because we were here in the beginning, we're here now, and we're gonna be here tomorrow, and so forth. So we need to carry our identity as that indigenous person, and that language is that identity.
All right, Whitney, I got about 15 seconds for you. You feel good about the future of the culture and where you're going, the direction you're going now?
Yeah, I think the seventh generation is what our youth and our generation is referred to as. And this is the generation that I believe that has done the most healing and is in a position now to really share what our culture emulates, what it represents. And I think in our nation and across the world, where we will be better for it when we learn the truth, the history, and the beautiful pieces of our culture.
I got to cut you off here. Whitney Rencountre, Jessie Rencountre, Darrell Redcloud, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you again the first Sunday night of next month. Good night.